Inquiry, Tranche 2, Phase 2, listening to more from Malcolm MacLeod, who was the manager of the SDS in 1986-1987. I'm joined by Alison from Police Spies Out of Lives. She's off screen because she's got, restrictions on people knowing who she is, anonymity. Alison, what do you make of him?
Malcolm McLaren.
Yeah, Malcolm MacLeod, not McLaren, slightly different. I mean, just to quickly recap, just the last 10 minutes we've seen
That's all I've got to say.
Emma Gargiter has been absolutely on form. This week is the Emma Gargiter show. It's Emma Gargiter's world, we just live in it. Over the last 10 minutes, she has really been skewering Malcolm MacLeod about his knowledge of the sexual relationships that the undercover officers that he was manager of took part in. And particularly in reference to the comments that he made to Operation Hearn in 2013, yeah, where he claims that he still didn't know about any sexual relationships, but that in the Hearn statement he says that it was inevitable.
Yeah. And he's got. So first of all, he's loyal, isn't he? He's
very loyal,
and he sees himself very paternalistically towards his officers. And
yes,
his job was to look out for them and to make sure that their welfare was.
There's a very long statement in his written statement about the misconduct of other officers shouldn't overshadow the very good work.
Right, so I think there's two lenses through which he sees and is giving evidence.
She used to be an English teacher, you might notice this.
The first one is, through the eyes of the other officers, his colleagues, his peers, but also the field officers, and he's protective, and everything he said in 2013 is about protecting himself, protecting his peers, and protecting those officers.
Yes.
Then I think the lens that we're now hearing this about is not them so much. Yes, he's kind of holding that a bit in their head, but I think his main priority, because he actually, that thing where you I'm so immature, but when you fancy someone, you keep saying their name because they're in their head. Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Really, Alison? I'm not sure what you mean, Alison. What could Alison mean by this idea, Alison?
Do you know what I mean? Like when you're 15 and you keep talking about someone and you go, oh yeah. Anyway.
Yes, Alison.
So he dropped in earlier his wife and his two daughters and his granddaughters.
He did, yes.
Right, pointing out that, I've got daughters, I've got granddaughters. I can see how this plays out for young women and for women now.
Yes.
When he was DCI, his daughters would have been little girls.
Yes, and he says that the sexist banter didn't cause him to raise his ire at any point.
But I think, and I could be wrong, but he's also mentioned Caroline Lucas blowing
by
open
name.
All this. Yeah.
Did he fancy her?
About Bob Lamper. This isn't about fancying, it's about someone being on the front of your head.
Yes,
right?
I see what you're saying.
And I think the front of his head is him going home this evening or going home this week, and his daughters and his granddaughters, who is probably in their, maybe his granddaughters maybe in their late teens, early 20s, mid-20s, now know about all this scandal. They know that Grandpa Malcolm was one of the senior officers, and they're saying, how did you let that happen, Grandpa? And he has to answer to them. So I think there's examples where he says stuff. So just in that bit there, he says, it has to be accepted that such liaisons will form. Doesn't mean to say I'm approving.
Yeah,
he's constantly qualifying himself.
Yes, he is, I think repeatedly,
is encapsulating those two perspectives. That
absolutely.
He's trying to hold at the same time.
I think he definitely he changed his position slightly during the questioning, and then he floundered terribly, repeatedly, when he was pressed very expertly, I would say, by Emma Gargiter, who pointed out that he was aware of the risk. He's repeatedly said he was aware of the risk, but that he didn't see it was his role to set what the boundaries were.
Yeah, and the other bit that I thought was interesting from what we've just heard, and I mean, forgive me because I zone in and out a little bit, so maybe everybody does know this, but I didn't know there was a manual back in the 80s.
So the suggestion is it was a loose leaf folder document.
Did we know that existed?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. So there was this document, but it's the precursor to the Tradecraft Manual, which supposedly what happened was that Andy Coles took that loose leaf document, collated together information with it, wrote his own narrative over the top of it.
Right, but haven't we been told up until now that there's no reference to sexual relationships in that?
We have been repeatedly told that.
And he's now said there was.
He's saying there was,
and of all the things he can't remember, he can remember
He can remember that,
specifically
yes.
looking at that folder
Yes.
and seeing that there was a reference there
Yes.
from previous field officers.
Yeah, I mean, he also claims that in 2013 he was unaware that any sexual relationships had taken place when he was questioned by Operation Hearn. Now, I mean, that flies in the face of the idea of what was actually in the press, because as I think everybody would remember, that he'd been in the press for a number of years by this point. The idea that he was unaware that the SDS, the place where he had worked for back then, was in the press until after Operation Hearn, it's not credible, is it?
No, and he is quite slow in how he speaks, so sometimes he loses. I don't know whether it's deliberate or not. It feels less deliberate than Bob Lambert. But
it does feel less, but I think everything feels less deliberate than Bob Lambert. I think there's definitely an element of him having panics late on in his evidence this afternoon. He got hot and bothered. He was repeating himself towards the end quite a lot, floundering around, repeatedly telling us that he didn't approve. Said, well, these things are going to happen. Obviously they were going to happen.
But they're not inevitable.
While also saying they were inevitable.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, you know, the use it was.
He wasn't going to defend the indefensible, but as you called out, but he's going to try.
He's going to give it a good go. Yeah, absolutely. Can I just say, we are not in the same room as the witness. We're in they put a barrier inside the room so that we're behind it. This gives the opportunity for wags such as myself to make little zinger one-liners when the opportunity presents itself to the room. Got to laugh. That's all I really care about. I mean, he's. It seems very clear, to anybody watching, that not only was he aware that the officers... So, I mean, one thing that he said in Operation Hearn was that the closer an officer got to the key targets, the better. The better the intelligence would be. And that it was, you know, that if you put them that close together, sexual relationships would follow. I mean, it seems... it seems he all but admitted to knowing that sexual relationship happened.
Yes.
But while saying that he definitely didn't know. And then he was, I didn't know until 20, and then he realised he was about to say a date that was before Operation Hearn, and sort of didn't finish the date, because he obviously knew before Operation Hearn, of course he did.
So the other bit of evidence that we've heard, which again I'm not sure I completely understand, except to get a sense of, that those turf wars between the Special Branch and the security services. So there was a whole load of questions about to what extent did the security services have influence over Special Branch tasking, or SDS tasking.
Yes.
And he seemed to be saying...
I would just say he was incredibly uncomfortable answering those questions, incredibly, and he chose his words so carefully.
Yes.
There was so much silence in between. As he was delivering the words, he was about, it may have been that Special Branch, the security services sought to influence more than they should have, but would have been uncomfortable if they had done that.
I know, I didn't understand all that, because at the same time he said the flow of information went one way. In other words, Special Branch provided information to the security services. Well, we know that anyway.
Yeah, we do.
The whole everything we've heard in all of the tranches so far is that the security services were one of the main customers for the Special Branch product.
Absolutely.
So I don't quite understand why even Emma Gardster is even asking that question. Don't we know that?
Well, I mean, we know it. We know it from the evidence that's been given by witnesses. He's one of the witnesses, and he's asked to corroborate it. Essentially,
what's the inquiry getting at?
I mean, I think what they're getting at is that the security services were essentially running a unit within the Metropolitan Police, which would be completely wrong from you know.
Don't we know that's how it works?
But I mean, essentially, yes, we do. However, senior managers such as himself, someone who it appears was repeatedly promoted. I mean, there was a point earlier on we were talking about. He was promoted into the SDS. He was promoted out of the SDS. Then he was, and then I had another promotion. I was promoted up then. So I mean, obviously a very senior officer by the time he retired.
Yeah.
That to admit that he was being he basically was asleep at the job, and the security services were essentially directing everything that they did within the unit, would be to admit that he was really failing in the safeguarding of, you know, the separation between the police and the security services. He admits that they had too much influence. The security services essentially were far more influential than they should have been. It's bordering on control. Is where he couched his terminology in the end.
So I'm very conscious I need to get a cup of tea. But the other question then that this obviously begs, and I only know this, but it's worth kind of flagging again, is how inadequate the remit of the inquiry is.
Incredibly.
Who's asking the security services what they think about the relationships? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who's asking any of those managers in those agencies
Absolutely.
what their take is on
Yes.
this? And was there any safeguarding there, or did anyone...
There's no questions whatsoever. I mean, we just every so often we get, there has been comments from Witness X of the security services, who gave, was very kind to the inquiry to give them a statement.
Was that Cairo and all that lot?
Yeah, some time ago. But no, there's been no questioning of the security services, and particularly when it becomes things like Stephen Scutt, where they...
Yeah, I didn't understand.
So, I mean, there's a lot to suggest that the removal of Scutt was basically two fingers to the security services from a special branch.
Because he was having these separate individual meetings.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
she's back.
Oh, she's back. We should return. We have to return, and I must end this because otherwise you'll get the thing.